everybody, and welcome to another board game review and gameplay demo. Today I'm excited to finally be diving into Cytosis. Before I really get started, if you haven't done so, take a look at all of my social media pages as well as my Patreon. On all of those you'll be able to interact with me and my channel in all sorts of different ways, including seeing videos ahead of time, voting on new videos, and lots of other cool stuff. Now, full disclosure before I really dive into this, I helped a lot with building up this game. I was one of the playtesters for it. I also helped develop some of the mechanics and just test it out and balance everything and all of that kind of stuff. I was also one of the scientific advisors on this game as well. So take what I say with that particular grain of salt. But getting right into it, Cytosis itself is a worker placement game that is taking place inside of a mammalian cell. Essentially, you'll use your workers to gain resources in the form of different macromolecules, and then you'll spend those to build up different cellular components like hormones, receptors, enzymes, all sorts of other different stuff in order to earn points. This also contains the virus module, which allows not quite a take that mechanic, but essentially something where the game is actively trying to attack you, and if you do well you can gain resources. If you're not so good, then you lose resources. But again, that's a module, it's not absolutely required. The game itself plays between 2 to 5 people and takes about an hour to an hour and a half or so to play, but with all of that we're going to get right into what this game is similar to. As far as similarities are concerned, there are two major ones that I wanted to mention. First and foremost is Lords of Waterdeep. Whenever I explain this game to people, I always mention Lords of Waterdeep because a lot of people have played it, and the mechanics really are very similar. You don't have the quest type of mechanics, but you're talking about worker placement where you're trying to gather and spend resources in order to build specific cards. There's also a little bit of intrigue in the form of the virus aspect with Cytosis, but not nearly to the extent that Lords of Waterdeep has. The other major one I wanted to mention is Viticulture. In Viticulture, as in Cytosis, everybody has their own sort of little board that they're dealing with. Now with Viticulture is a lot more complex and there's a lot more going on with it, whereas in Cytosis, if you're playing with the virus module, then you have individual trackers because you have 3 different viruses that can potentially attack, so you're able to combat each one individually to a certain extent. You do have that same idea of real individuality when you're playing through this game, and it creates that sort of unique feel of yes, this is my stuff and nobody else can touch it type of thing. But with that, we're going to get right into how to play Cytosis. Alright everybody, we're all set up and ready to start playing Cytosis. As I mentioned, this is a worker placement game that occurs inside of a mammalian cell. To start off, I'm just going to be using the base game without any of the additional modules, but I will talk about those later on. Essentially, to set this game up, you pick somebody to be the first player. That person gets 1 ATP, and then the players next to them will get 2, 3, 4, etc., etc. as you go. Right now I've got this set up for 3 people. In the end goal is to try to get as many HP or health points as you possibly can. The main way that you do that is by spending your resources in order to complete these cards. To start off, I'll go over the resources that you'll be using. First, we've got the mRNA, which are the little black ones. We've got protein, which are the red ones. We've got lipids, which are the yellow ones. We've got carbohydrates, which are the green ones. And then we've got ATP, which are the little rocket ships. Effectively, going on the board, we will be collecting those resources in different ways. In order to collect mRNA, we go to the nucleus. In order to collect lipids, we go to the smooth ER. In order to collect the carbohydrates, we go to the plasma membrane and exchange ATP. To get ATP, we go to the mitochondria. And then to get proteins that we use ourselves, we go to the free ribosome over here, and that exchanges the blacks directly for the red. We can also do it over here as we're building up some of the cards. But essentially, each of those locations have multiple options, or most of them do, where you can get 3 or 2 of that particular resource. Down here with the plasma membrane and glucose transport, you can spend up to 2 ATP to get the same number of carbohydrates, essentially. Like I mentioned, the main goal of this game is to get as many health points as you possibly can. The main way to do that is with cell component cards. Like I said, I have this set up for 3 people. Everybody will get 3 cards and you pick 2 to keep. That happens no matter how many players you have. Everybody also gets 4 workers. For more players, you get fewer workers. You also get your 2 vesicle markers and a total of 3 individual goal and track markers. So one of the track markers goes here to track the number of HP you get. The other 2 will be used later in the game to mark off goals. In the end, the timer for this game are the event cards. The event cards, one will be flipped up at the beginning, or rather the end of each round, and essentially that is how you track how much time is left. Once the last event card is flipped over, that's going to be the last round of the game. You notice I removed a couple because I have fewer than 5 players. So you'll see we've got the various component cards down here. These represent most of the types of component cards in the game. You've got cards related to you've got cards related to protein hormones, steroid hormones, and then you've got what I refer to as bonus cards, and then you also have enzymes and alcohol detoxification. So I'll go over the simplest ones first, which are these little bonus cards. Essentially, when you get one of these cards, whether you start with it in your hand or you acquire it with a worker, you just do whatever it says. In this case, take 2 of the carbohydrates. And then over here with the enzymes are made primarily with protein. So the way that you'll do that is you'll have mRNA in your personal stash. You go to the free ribosome, you can exchange however many you want for the same number of protein. And then on your next turn, if it's available, you can go to the cytoplasm where we do enzyme synthesis. You pay however much protein is required plus the ATP, and then you put it in front of you. Essentially, the enzymes are a set collection where, in addition to the health they give you initially, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them, you'll get an additional bonus 0, 2, 5, 9, or 14 points at the end of the game. Last but not least, for the relatively simple ones, we've got the alcohol detoxification. This occurs up here in the smooth ER. When you go there, all you need to do is spend whatever the requirement is. In this case, I need to spend 2 ATP. And that will allow me to put it in front of me just like that. It's only worth 1 health point, but at the end of the game, this is another not quite set collection, but rather the most collection. Whoever has the most gets a bonus 8 points, second gets 5, third gets 2. Okay? Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that along with the cards that you start with in your hand, the 2 cards that you begin with, after you choose your cards to start with, you'll also be allowed to choose 2 additional resources to begin with. The thing is that you cannot pick protein or carbohydrates. You have to pick from the RNA, lipids, and ATP. So essentially you want to look at your cards and see, what do I have available? What do I need in order to make these? So last but not least, as far as the cell component cards and how they work, are these, the protein and steroid hormone cards. There are 2 major types of these. There are ones that are the actual hormones, and then there are ones that are receptors for the hormones. But these are built in the same way. The first thing that you want to do is you want to look at the card itself and see what the main color is. You'll notice here this one is blue and this one is red. That indicates where on the board you're going to start manufacturing these different things. For example, for this steroid hormone receptor I would start here in the rough ER because it's red, take my vesicle here, and then assuming that I've got everything I need, here I'll just grab a bunch of stuff. What you would do is you would look and you can see here this is black going to red. So I would take 2 of my black mRNAs, exchange them for red protein, and then put them on just like that. This does not use the free protein that you get from the ribosome over here that goes into your stockpile. It has to be exchanged on that spot. After that, say on my next turn or whatever it is, you go to the Golgi apparatus, you physically move your vesicle, and then I would put, in this case, a lipid, just like that. After that, we go to the plasma membrane where I would pay the required ATP. At this point, I would reveal the card from my hand and say, I've built this, give myself 4 points, and that's the end of it. The receptors are unique because at the bottom you can see it says plus 2 others, yourself plus 1. That means that if somebody else builds a steroid hormone, I get an additional plus 2. If I build a steroid hormone, it's plus 1. Essentially, these work as being sort of not pay as you go, but pay it forward type of thing, where the earlier you get these out, the more points they're worth, but the upfront worth of the hormones themselves are far more valuable, essentially. But they work the exact same way, so this would go back to me, these would go back over here, where if I want to build this steroid hormone, I would start here in the blue. I would take my vesicle, put it right there, take my lipids, so that's 3 lipids, 1, 2, 3, and then I would go down here to the Golgi apparatus, where we add either the green or the yellow. Since I already have the yellow, that would mean that I need to add my green. I need my carbohydrate. So just put it right there. Oh no! After that, we go to the plasma membrane. I pay my 2 ATP. These all go back to the stockpile. I get my vesicle back, and this goes in front of me, and I would get 8 points. That's the basics of it. Now, you can see that there are only so many spots right here, so you can easily tie up specific locations, but again, everybody only has 2 vesicles, so you don't want to tie them up too much because you would end up hurting yourself potentially more than you would hurt other players. But that's the basics of how all the different component cards work, where you build them, and in the end, how you get health points. Now, moving on from there, just going over some of the other locations, laureates in biology is very important. When you put a worker there, you get the first player marker. This is the only way it moves, and this is also how you can claim a goal. When you claim a goal, then that means that you get additional points at the end of the game, just depending. So in this case, gain an additional 3 points for each steroid hormone receptor you completed in this game. So if you happen to have 2 or 3 of those, that's potentially pretty worthwhile. Also, the first person who claims the goal gets an additional 3 points right away. The next person doesn't get a bonus, but the idea being, of course, that if you bide your time a little bit and wait to see what you can really do, then you can potentially get something more valuable in the end. Next up are these gray flasks. These are sort of bonus workers that you can use if you've ever played a game with grande workers or similar. You pay 4 ATP. You can take one of these and you can essentially encroach where somebody else already is. So that just means that you'll be able to do the same thing twice, or if somebody took a spot that you really want, you can spend the ATP in order to go there as well. But those are all of the main pieces here. Next up, I'm going to talk very briefly about the modules. The first module I want to mention is this one, my personal favorite, the epigenetic modifications. These are essentially start powers. So these are asymmetric starting powers that allow you to do all sorts of different stuff, whether it's paying less to use a gray flask, or you can do trades of resources that you normally can't do on the board, not having to pay for these individual things. Something I didn't mention is that in order to get more cards in your hand, this is how you do it. If you go here, you take this card, you get it for free. If you go here, you get the card, but it costs you an ATP, costs you 2, costs you 3. At the end of the round, the leftmost card is discarded, they move over, and then you get a new card off the top of the deck. That's how that works, and then you draw the event and do all that kind of stuff. Getting back to the epigenetic modifications, they do all sorts of different stuff. It's an optional thing, but again, it's the asymmetry, it's the asymmetric powers that a lot of people are fairly familiar with. So it just adds a little bit of spice and flavor to the game. Last but not least for this particular thing as far as modules are concerned is the virus module. The virus module adds all sorts of interesting and unique stuff to this game. It's not quite a take that mechanic, it's not quite an attack mechanic, but it is a mechanic where the game itself is attacking you. So you may notice that we've got little virus particles around here, and the track is now different colors. So to set up for the virus module, you set it up the same way as a normal game, but everybody gets one of these boards, as well as 3 little cubes. The cubes represent your immunity against Ebola, flu, and the rhinovirus. And in addition to that, we also have specific cards for the virus module. We have cell component cards, which indicate that the viruses are coming to attack. We've got events, which also mean that the viruses are attacking immediately. And then we have goals primarily related to the immune response and also to purchasing the virus attack component cards. Effectively, the way this works is if somebody gets one of the component cards, that person is able to immediately spend ATP to increase their antibodies, and then everybody else loses health points. After that, everybody rolls dice. The number of dice you roll depends on where you are on the track here. If you're between 0 and 13, you roll 1 die, 14 to 28 rolls 2 dice, and then 29 and above rolls 3 dice. You take your immune response plus the total you rolled on the die, and then you see who has the most. Whoever has the most gains 2 resources of their choice, second most gains 1 resource, and then whoever has the lowest number will lose a resource of their choice. And that's essentially the virus attack. The main event virus ones, these are just where you don't get a chance to increase your antibodies initially. Instead, everybody just rolls dice and you gain and lose resources as appropriate. The other thing also is where with these in particular, with all of these actually, everybody is allowed to pay ATP at the end in order to increase their antibodies, and that's the primary way that you do it. So like I said, it's not quite an attack mechanic, but it's also it also means that there's another piece that you can track. That you can keep track of. Like I said, it's not necessary, but it does make the game a little bit fresh if you've played it a whole bunch. Same thing with the epigenetic modifications. But with that, that's all I wanted to say about Cytosis. That's the basics of how the game functions and how the game flows. But now it's time to go into some pros and cons as well as general conclusions. Well, I hope you enjoyed my little demo for how to play Cytosis, but now, as I mentioned, time for pros and cons. First and foremost, the biggest pro, me! That's right, it's because I made this game, or at least I helped to make it, but no, I'm just kidding. The biggest pro for me is honestly the theme. It's part of why I was so excited that Genius Games got in touch with me to really try to help out this game and to do the playtesting and talk about the science behind it and all that kind of stuff, because it has that perfect light touch that I really enjoy seeing, which in this case is you have a lot of the scientific aspects where we are talking about how a cell actually functions, what it actually does, what each organelle actually goes through and what it does for our bodies, but it's in an abstract enough way that anybody who understands how to play a worker placement game can do it. For example, I mentioned Viticulture as one of the similar games. I don't know anything about winemaking, but in general I enjoy Viticulture because it does a good job of integrating the theme, but not in an overbearing way. And Cytosis is the same kind of thing, and it's relatively rare, especially in the realm of science. So second major pro for me is just the general mechanics for this. I think that it's a very, very well balanced game, and a lot of other people, not just me, but people that I've played with who are gamers but not scientists, have really enjoyed it as well. Again, if you're a fan of most worker placement games, but primarily looking at Lords of Waterdeep and Viticulture, but also things like even Sulk Inn or Chimera Station, if you guys have played that, Alchemists, all sorts of different things. You have a good balance in the different locations, the math behind it just sort of makes sense, and you never really feel like you're completely behind or that there's nothing that you can do in order to sort of catch up and get back to a reasonable spot. Next up, one of the pros is I love the idea of having the little modules. So having the epigenetic things not really be required is nice. I do love the epigenetic things, and incidentally, same thing for the virus portion, the virus module, or whatever you want to refer to it as. It's nice because it gives that little oomph to it where it adds a unique aspect to the gameplay itself, but since it's not required, it means that you can play just sort of a standard worker placement style game, and that tends to be a little bit easier to digest for a lot of gamers, because by and large worker placement, they don't have take that, they more of just have, oh, you wanted to go to that spot, sorry not sorry type of thing. And Cytosis does definitely have that in spades. Moving on to the cons for me, honestly there really aren't very many big ones, but again, that's most likely because I'm really biased on this. I did help with all the playtesting, and everything that I addressed as an issue was addressed before the game actually came out. That said, since I've been playing with other people as well as playing at the convention and some of that other kind of thing, I've noticed that some people still think that the theme is a little bit too heavy, which I can understand, and especially with the idea of moving through the rough ER to the Golgi and then to the plasma membrane, doing that whole thing. I can definitely see how that can be a little bit frustrating for people, and I've seen people get frustrated by it, but after 2 or 3 rounds, most people, especially experienced gamers, really don't have any issues with it, and I haven't seen too many problems with in that regard. There's 2 other major cons that I wanted to talk about. The first one is that virus module. I know I said that I personally like it, but again, it's not something that everybody enjoys, and it's one of those things where if you've gotten used to it, then it can be kind of awkward to go back. And I had that experience not too long ago where I was playing with somebody and I was like, oh, you've never played this before, so let's not play with virus. And I was kind of like, oh, I really miss the virus type of thing. So it can change in that sense. It's not too bad though. Same thing for the last con that I had for this is the fact that this particular edition, you may notice it has this foil for the main title. This is the collector's edition, so that's why the pieces that I have are actually structured after their molecular equivalents. If you get the regular game, then you have little cubes. You still have the cool little rocket ships for the ATP, and you get the Erlenmeyer flasks for the workers, but you don't get those cool upgraded component pieces, which I think are really cool. And it's unfortunate because it was one of the Kickstarter things and now you can't really get them anymore, and it's something that kind of perturbs me on most Kickstarters, where if you find a game you really want, then you can't get the Kickstarter exclusives. But that said, overall I obviously really enjoy this game. I mean, I helped make it. My name is literally on it. Like, I do love it. It is a great game. Certainly take this review for what it is with the salt of the bias that I have. Read up on it, watch some other videos, see what other people think. But again, in my opinion, if you enjoy games like Lords of Waterdeep, like Viticulture, like most of these really reasonably well designed worker placements, then you should really like Cytosis, even outside of the theme. That said, if you're a scientist like me, if you really enjoy the science theme in games, then this is definitely worth looking at. With that, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much as always for watching, and I will see you next time.